On this episode of the First 50 Pages, Kelsey and I get to have another chat with one of our all-time favorite authors and podcast guests, the incomparable Queen of Comfort Reads, Katherine Center.
So having written her first novel in the 6th grade, fan fiction about Duran Duran, Katherine was hooked. From then on, she was doomed to want to be a writer. So since then, Katherine Center has become the New York Times bestselling author of 10 novels, including some of our library's favorites, How to Walk Away, Things You Save in a Fire, and Hello Stranger. Her latest book is The Rom-Commers, a connected story to her blockbuster hit, The Bodyguard. Welcome back to the First 50 Pages, Katherine.
Hi, it's so fun to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Of course.
And I can't believe it's been more than 2 years since we last talked and discussed your essay, Read for Joy. We really love that conversation. And that conversation sparked other conversations across our library with our colleagues and patrons, and even with our own families and complete strangers. So if listeners haven't got to that episode yet, go back and give it a listen. Visit Katherine's website to read the full essay and check out her awesome Read for Joy merchandise. It's so beautiful, the essay and the merchandise. They're all beautiful.
It's fantastic.
But since that time that we got to chat with you, you have written and released the books The Bodyguard and Hello Stranger. We love them. And Happiness for Beginners, which was one of my very favorite of your books, was released as a movie on Netflix starring Ellie Kemper and Luke Grimes. So I just want to take a quick second to acknowledge and celebrate all of those awesome things. So we love it. Like, oh, she's got a new book coming out.
Yeah.
She's got a new book.
Like, yay.
I
fun.
do want to celebrate those awesome things. Thank you. Yes, celebrating is good.
Yeah, and I think I constantly am referencing your Read for Joy essay when I'm, talking about books with patrons and how that, reading for joy doesn't mean only reading happy stories. Like, you can get joy and fulfillment out of a murder mystery. Like, it's totally up to you. It's whatever, is your compass to find the best books for you. So
Yes.
Your latest book is called The Rom-Commers and has been getting such great pre-publication reviews. The fictional sisters from Instagram have summed up my thoughts on it perfectly. The review states, "You guys, she did it. Katherine Center wrote the most perfect rom-com ever." It honestly and genuinely might be my favorite book of yours yet. I think I keep saying that every time, but you keep doing it every time. So could you share with our listeners a little bit on what it's about?
Yeah. I think this is the book that I was put on this earth to write. I think that this is the book that I'm here for. It kind of wrote itself. So it's a romantic comedy about screenwriters who are writing a romantic comedy. The main character, Emma, is kind of I don't want to say a failed screenwriter, but she's a screenwriter who never really got off the ground because even though she had big dreams, her dad got sick and she wound up having to be his caretaker. And her dad is awesome, so she was happy to do that, but also it meant setting a lot of the things that she wanted to do with her life aside. And as the story starts, she gets her big break, which is to go work as a ghostwriter for a very, very famous Hollywood screenwriter named Charlie Yates. And she adores Charlie Yates. He's like her writing god. She loves everything he's ever written, even, movies about sharks and the mafia and stuff she's not even really interested in because she is a rom-com person. But she thinks he's such a fantastic writer that she loves him despite her entire personality. She just loves his writing. So she gets to go write with him, uncredited, and rework a screenplay that he's written that is a rom-com, but it's terrible. And that's actually whenever I have to give like a 3-sentence sort of synopsis of the story, that's what I say. I say, he's written a romantic comedy screenplay and it's terrible. She just got hired to fix it. Let the banter begin is kind of my summary. But yeah, so she goes out there to work with him and it's a disaster, but it's a good disaster. He doesn't really want her there. There's a lot of tension early on, but what they find is that they really their love language is writing. Like they just both really, really love to write, and they wind up writing together and having a great time and falling in love. And that is not a spoiler, that's just something to look forward to. It's because as Emma says in the screenplay, in the book, when she's talking about how screenplays work, with romantic comedies, it's never will they or won't they? They will. They will. They definitely will. That's not the story question. The story question is not where are they going? It's how will they get there? And so the way that these two characters get there, for me, is like the sweetest, swooniest, most uplifting, most oxytocin boosting story that I can imagine. And even to this day, I am clearly my own target audience, because even to this day, I've got the copy edited PDF on my laptop. And, if somebody's mean to me in the grocery store or something, or if I'm just having an off day and I'm feeling weird, I will sneak over to my computer and open up this PDF and just read a couple chapters just for a little oxytocin boost. Just the way that these two people banter with each other and tease each other and flirt with each other and push and pull on each other. It just totally lifts me up and just makes me feel so happy. So I really, really love this story. This is like my heart and soul on the page, this book.
And I think you are not the only one that this writing is going to have that effect on, because I felt the same way. I love the dialogue in the book. We were just talking about it. It's sharp. It's fresh. It's it just doesn't feel forced, and it does lift. I totally get it. Reading this book, you want to go back to it. It lifts your spirits. If you're having a bad day, I just want to go to that book right now, because this was a bad day and I need something to lift me up. I totally relate to what you were saying. I loved it too. We both did. Yeah. We thought it was so good.
We kind of had to fight over who got to read the pre-pub copy first. We were like, oh.
So one of the things that Kelsey and I have figured out that we love to talk about is just the power of story, and the way that it affects readers. And this, to me, really was a love letter to stories.
That's my favorite thing to think about, read about, study, deep dive into. And it's they really are life-changing. They really can be so powerful. They can teach us these deep things that we need to learn in our lives that we don't even necessarily know that we need to learn. They take us sort of to this much deeper place than the prefrontal cortex. They take us way deep down. And that's my whole thing about trying to find your own compass as a reader, about giving yourself permission to read the stories that you feel drawn to, no matter what your high school English teacher might think about those stories, right? Just giving yourself permission to kind of follow your own compass about the stories that are calling to you. Because I think frequently when you're drawn toward a certain genre or a certain type of story, those stories are speaking to you on a level that's much deeper than consciousness. And they are helping you work through a lot of the sort of tangled questions that we're all constantly working through. And there's something really healing and nourishing about doing that. And it's not even necessarily something that you can put into words, but you just feel it. You feel how it shifts your perspective, or it gives you context, or it helps your framework, or, suddenly you come through having read a story that just seemed like entertainment or fluff, but you've learned something, and it's something that kind of shifts your own life a little bit. And I think that is really powerful stuff. I think stories are uniquely able to change our lives.
So I'm a huge rom-com fan, and I have, some patrons that I definitely talk about rom-coms with every time that they come into the library. So we're trading stuff back and forth. And obviously your name comes up a lot, as well as, some of the other big name authors out there. And I love how you centered this story on the folks who craft these love stories for us and illustrate the impact that a great one can, have on us. So when brainstorming and while you were writing this book, were there any specific rom-coms, movie, or book that you drew inspiration from?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you that this book is a love letter to stories and the power of stories, but it's definitely also a love letter to romantic comedies specifically. You know, it's a much maligned genre. It's, you know, the most eye rolled at, I think, of all of them. It's this thing that I keep trying to do, which is stand up for love stories. You know, I think we're so judgmental about them. We're so dismissive of them. We just keep insisting that they're just ridiculous fluff just as a culture, that they have no cultural value, that they're just total bubblegum. And I just don't think that's right. You know, I mean, I just keep sitting there watching it happen, you know, watching the eye rolls happen and thinking, this is not correct. You know, why do we roll our eyes so much harder at love stories than, say, zombie apocalypse stories, you know, serial killer stories? Why are those more like culturally valuable to us? You know, why do we insist that human love and human connection and romantic love are more ridiculous than zombies? This is sort of my eternal question. Like, what's going on with us culturally that we keep doing that? We tell a lot of stories in this culture about people doing terrible things. Like, we definitely have that covered. I think we do not do as good of a job of telling stories about people authentically, earnestly trying to do good things. And so that's always what I'm trying to do. I'm a little bit of like a salmon swimming upstream, trying to get that done.
So I have to say, so Kelsey loves the rom-com. She does. And I don't gravitate towards them, but I love a good one, right? Like, I have really loved your books, but I had to have a friend really convince me a long time. No, read it, and I was like, I don't know, I just don't, you know. I was like, no, read it, and I've been converted ever since, honestly. But the thing I think that is unique about this book is you can take a cynic who, you know, much like Charlie's character, who doesn't necessarily believe in the rom-com, or like you said, validated, or just doesn't get it. So you could take a reader who doesn't, you know, I think isn't like, no, I'm not a romance reader, and give them this book. And I really think it might do something to their brain. It might, because like you said, you do take the construction of the story seriously, and it's deliberate, and it is crafted, but it still feels effortless, and it I don't know. We just can't stop talking about how much we love this book, but
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that like the books that I write feel very conversational. They feel very chatty, like the main character is just talking to you. And when you read them, they should feel effortless. It wasn't actually effortless to make them.
No,
you know what I mean?
I'm sure not.
Like, I'm like, but it should feel that way. Like I really, really work draft after draft after draft to make it feel like your best friend is like talking to you late at night, you know, over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and just telling the truth about her life, and just telling you like the best, most entertaining story ever. So that is a part of it. I want it to feel easy, you know. I want it to feel like something you just sink into. I mean, my sort of great dream is always to kind of get people to forget that they're reading it all, and just to have the story kind of just happening, you know, kind of on the movie screen of your mind, and you're just lost in it. The other thing is, it is like the books that I'm writing now at this point in my career are rom-coms, but they're like half rom-com, half women's fiction, right? Is what I would say. Because they do always have an incredibly strong love story. And the love story is always my favorite part, because it's the most joyful part. But there's this other side of things in all of the stories that I write, where the characters are having to go through something that's hard. You know, they have pasts, they have struggles, they have incorrect assumptions about life and who they are and who they need to be to kind of get through life. And every story that I write kind of gives these characters like an opportunity to kind of reassess some of that and change and be courageous and sort of step up in their lives. And so you get these sort of change arcs that are really much more sort of women's fiction-y, And of course that involves struggle and hardship, right? Because that's in life where wisdom comes from. So I always make sure to put that stuff in there because I like to see the change. I like to feel the change in the characters. I want to see them change and grow. But then I also want somebody to take their shirt off. Like I want both. Like I feel like I should be able to have it all. I want the personal growth. And then I also really, really want the sort of particular emotional bliss that you can only get in a rom-com or in a romance. One of the very special things about romance novels and rom-coms is that you are guaranteed a happy ending at the end of the story. And, you know, I mean, just in case you don't already know, like if you ever read a Katherine Center book, we will end well, you know? Everybody may struggle on the, like, I feel like my Katherine Center guarantee is that I am never going to run the main character over with a bus in the final chapter of the book. You know? Like I might do it in the first chapter, but I'm never going to end that way because I always want to bring us to a place where the characters have gone through something hard, but have grown and changed and learned things and they're sort of better on the other side.
In the book, as they're, you know, kind of creating and getting into the story, you kind of share bits of that, you know, like all genres have a promise, you know, it's kind of one. And you kind of just talked about that. And, you know, for people who, you know, we think about those things. And like you said, a mystery has a promise, you know, and a romance has the promise of the happy ending. But in this book, I had a laugh out loud moment, right? It was such a fun moment when you talk about the aggressively misunderstood happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we give anything away in talking about that. But I guess, so what does that mean to you? And why did you think it was important to include that in the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think we seem sort of fixated in this culture on interpreting the concept of a happy ending in a book as interpreting it in the most ungenerous way possible. Like we're basically always saying that if a person enjoys a happy ending, then they require some kind of full fantasy Disneyfied version of life with like little birds fluttering around and tweeting, and, you know. And I don't think that's what a happy ending has to be. And I don't even think that's really what most readers want from a happy ending. You know, I think a happy ending just basically says, and Emma says this in the story, right, that she never reads happily ever after as, you know, nothing bad ever happened to anyone ever again. And I don't know if I can quote from the book off the top of my head, but she's basically saying when she reads happily ever after, when she thinks about that concept, she's thinking, okay, and they spent their lives together and they faced every hard thing that came along, you know, the best that they could, and they made the most of their lives. And that's what I think of as a happy ending. And so for me, it's just really, it's not that, you know, finding people to love in your life, building your family, whatever that means. It's not that any of that makes life suddenly perfect and flaw-free. I mean, life is a whole series of difficulties and struggles and sufferings and disappointments and all the normal things. I mean, none of that changes. But when you've been able to put a life together for yourself where you're living it fully and you are connected with other people who can support you and look after you and, you know, and cheer for you, then, you know, you have found yourself a happy ending. To me, that's what that means.
I think to quote you from the book, like like life keeps, you know, or pushing us forward, right? Like we continue moving forward, like even with all of the things that happen.
Yeah.
So, of course, avid readers of yours, like us, will delight in the connection you've created between the rom-commers and your earlier book, The Bodyguard. What motivated your decision to craft a link between these two stories?
Oh, I think it just was there from the beginning. You know, it never really felt like a decision. It was just, as soon as I knew I wanted to write about screenwriters, I was like, oh, and of course, you know, this guy, Charlie Yates, is the guy who wrote the movie that made Jack Stapleton famous. And so it's a connected story. It's not a sequel. And the stories are completely separate and you can read them in any order. But yeah, this story is connected to The Bodyguard. And you do have a couple of Jack Stapleton cameos. I mean, depending on how you count, there's at least 2, maybe 2.5, or even 3. So he shows up a few times because he is actually friends with Charlie. They were sort of broke and just starting out together in LA back before either of them got famous, and they're buddies. So yeah, there's a great little cameo with Jack Stapleton early on in the story that I had so much fun writing that I stopped everything and called my mom and read it to her. I was like, oh my God, I've just written this thing. And she's a great audience for that. So yeah, so there's a lot of Jack Stapleton in there just for fun. It's so fun to connect stories and to have universes sort of collide in that way.
It is. And it's not something new for you. You've done that before in previous books. And it is kind of just that little delightful moment for people who are reading your books and making those connections. So
yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
In your last few books, I've noticed you've tackled some pretty serious and what maybe I'd say are maybe lesser known health conditions like Sadie's face blindness and Hello Stranger and Emma's dad's complications following the tragic climbing accident years earlier in the rom-commers. What prompted you to tackle these medical conditions in your stories?
Well, with Hello Stranger, yeah, the whole story is sort of based on this thing that happens to the main character, Sadie, where she's in an accident and she winds up with this condition called face blindness, which is a real condition. I was amazed at the number of people who reviewed it, and they were like, I was reading along and I thought, did this author make this up?
I thought
it's real.
I was like, it has to be real. She's not going to just make this up. But oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was such a thing.
Yeah, it's real. And actually that idea came to me years ago when I was making dinner and I was actually listening to NPR. I was listening to This American Life.
Yep.
And they had done a Valentine's Day show with a bunch of love stories. And one of the love stories on the show was about a woman who fell in love with a man who had face blindness. That was the first time I ever heard about that condition. And that love story did not end well on that particular show. But it really stuck in my head. And, as this frequently happens to me, I'll hear sort of an unhappy love story and I'll think to myself, I could fix that story. So I found myself thinking about that story and wanting to write a better version of that story, like a story where things end better. And so that's kind of how that one came about. And then that wound up really being the whole premise for that story in a way that guided the plot in all kinds of different directions that were very new for me. Like I definitely was trying a lot of stuff that I haven't done before, which I think was, is always a good thing. And then, one of the big struggles that we have, I think, in modern life is various sort of physical illnesses and ailments that we all struggle with in different ways, And so for Emma's dad, he has this condition in the wake of a traumatic brain injury. Emma's dad in the rom-commers has this condition called Meniere's disease, which is like an inner ear problem. And nobody really knows what causes it. But that's one that I actually have firsthand experience with because when I was right out of college, I lived with a family in their spare room, and the dad of the family had Meniere's disease, and it had been very sort of mild. And then right around the time that I was living with them, it got way worse for some reason that no one could explain. And he was actually up on a roof doing some work on the roof when he had what's called a drop attack. And it felt like the whole world just flipped over and he fell off the roof. And so from then on, for the year that I was living there, there was a lot of medical visits and discussions about how to try and curtail all the effects of this condition that he had. So that's one I actually knew about from my own life and had always kind of wanted to write about. And then it seemed to fit for Emma's dad.
And I kind of take it as I was reading that it kind of feels like it's another type of grief for readers to learn about, kind of like wishing for what could have been or what was after these medical traumas, that it's another thing but in a safe way in fiction that we're able to, you know, learn how people are coping with grief and loss and trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really, I think about that a lot. In fact, I think Emma says something about that, like to the reader in the book, where she's like, I mean, there's this moment, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 chapters in, where she's like, okay, now I have to tell you something really sad. And she's like, but don't worry, you know, it's everybody's okay now, mostly. Yeah. With obvious exceptions. And then she says something like, but it's, you know, it always makes us better people to, you know, to listen to other people's heartache. And, you know, I really think that it's true that, like, I don't think it's a bad thing for stories to have genuine hardship in them and genuine sadness and genuine grief. I think the struggle in the story make it a more meaningful story. They make it more engaging. They make it matter more. I mean, part of the reason that love matters, love of all different kinds matters in human life, is because life is hard. You know, we all have to do a lot of suffering and a lot of struggling, and having people in your life who can comfort you and make you laugh and make it better is like so essential, right? So these books are always kind of an argument for why love matters in human life. And the struggle is part of making that argument. You know, it's where the wisdom comes from, but it's also partly what makes the story matter.
I didn't write it down, dang it, but as we're talking about this and thinking about it, you said these stories, you know, having this variety of stories is important, because if we don't have them, like, you know, we have, you know, it's important to have this range of stories. It's important to have love stories, because we can't imagine them if we don't get to experience them. I'm butchering what you said, but that's the point of my takeaway from this. But they are necessary.
I totally know the part that you're talking about, and it's when Emma and Charlie are arguing, and, you know, Charlie really loves like an unhappy story where, like, you know, all the mobsters are shot at the end, or like everybody's eaten by sharks. Like, he writes a lot of movies that are pretty dark, and Emma's trying to write these uplifting, happy, rom-com-y stories. And at one point she says to Charlie, don't you see, if those are the only stories we ever tell, then those are the only stories we have.
Yeah. Yes.
I think about that all the time. That is my first thought every morning and my last thought as I go to bed at night.
Well, you know, we haven't said it 100 times yet, but we loved the rom-commers. We loved it. We think, you know, put it on the top of your to-be-read list for this summer. Save it for like a really rough week, maybe when you need that oxytocin boost, because it is sure to deliver.
Maybe try to like pace yourself. Like, okay, you can only read 2 chapters today.
No, you're not going to. You're going to devour it.
You'll just go back and reread it again and again, and it'll be fun.
Yeah. You guys are the best. I'm so glad you loved it. Thank you.
We did. And we will keep looking forward to all of the new things you do, because you do not disappoint us. You know, you don't. We know what we're getting, and we are up for it all the time.
Thank you guys for letting me come and hang out with you. I wish we could do this every week. It was such a joy.
It was. And
we could build it into our schedule. Be like, we can't be at the library today. We have to talk with Katherine. Sorry.
I know Kelsey and I thought we're just like listening. We're like, oh yeah, we have to ask a question.
We're like, oh yeah, we do have questions to ask.
We got to keep this going. We can't just listen.